Right, everybody. I'm back, and hopefully this is going to be a little bit better, but I won't be able to show you any of the pictures that I'm looking at. It's just going to have to be, here I am, live-a-live-o. So let me know if you can hear things. I'm going to be working off this piece of paper. I don't know if you'll be able to read this. The Contract for Rural and Working America. There it is. And as I was saying, this is an idea that I had when I was running for Congress in 2018, and it's a response to Thomas Frank's idea that we don't really have a strong populist response from Democrats. And that, hi Elizabeth, or hi Beth, how are you? Hi Charlie, thank you for helping me out here. Yes, Thomas Frank, oh, you love my wigs, it's bumpy. Lock your wig. Thank you, Jennifer. We're glad to see you all are kind of joining me back, and once again try and share this. And I'll probably have to do this presentation again once I figure out what the problem is. In the past, it's been related to Facebook and sometimes to that software that I use. So hopefully this will be okay for today, but we'll be digging deeper into this. Anyway, the point is that Thomas Frank, a noted author, makes the point that Democrats don't do a very good job supporting rural and working people, and that's really been true. In fact, the whole country doesn't really do a good job supporting rural and working people. For people who work, their wages basically froze in place in the late 70s, early 80s, and they've kind of stayed the same even though the cost of living has gone up. And that's a problem. And if you're a farmer, you've been dumped on by America since more than a century ago, for over 100 years. So that's why I came up with this idea for the Contract for Rural and Working America. And the first thing, I'm going to just read the items off to you, and we'll dig in deeper to them over time. Restoring healthcare in rural America. Obviously, we also have healthcare problems in the United States for all of us. Our healthcare needs to be addressed. It's too expensive, it's too complicated to use, it covers everybody but in a very inefficient way, and it's not effective. We don't live long enough, we have all kinds of problems related to it. So, but in rural America it's worse, because if you live in rural America, hospitals around you are closing. That's because American medicine is aiming to make a profit on virtually every transaction. And in rural America, sometimes you're not going to make a profit, or sometimes even worse, you're not going to make enough profit. So these hospitals out in the country are shutting down. The next thing is education and child care. Education, of course, we're having a crisis right now, and that's a fairly deep subject. But one of the things that working people need is to be able to get affordable child care. And I believe we should be doing nationalized child care, a child care system attached to our public schools. So this would be a jobs program, and it means if you're a worker and you've just had a baby, you can, once you get ready to go back to work, you would have a place, have quality child care, and that would be a jobs program as well. Next is support for small subsistence and family farms. This is not about farms that have a CEO. If your farm has a CEO, I'm not really talking about you. I'm talking about you if you're a farmer and you raise vegetables and sell them at the farmer's market, or you provide, if you were a dairy farmer. It used to be we had a lot of dairy farmers here in Kentucky, but they got put out of business a year and a half, 2 years ago. I think we also need to focus on local food. Hi Cheryl, how are you? I think we need to focus on growing local food for a number of reasons. When you eat food that's grown locally, you're going to be getting the benefit of what the bees do, of what the insects do, of what the soil does, and you'll be better acclimated to whatever diseases are floating around in your neighborhood. Now, that's just an example. There are other things that need to be done to help farmers. Farmers are up against the environment, and they're up against the price of whatever the thing they're growing is. So they can lose time and time again. So there are various other ways we can support farmers, and I can go deeper into that. Number 4 is rebuilding America's infrastructure and domestic supply chain. Our infrastructure is collapsing, and we see it all around us. And it should be particularly disturbing to you if you look at pictures of construction that's going on in nations like China or Singapore or Indonesia or many, many other nations are focusing on having an infrastructure. When you travel outside of the United States, virtually every other airport you go to is a nicer airport than we have in the United States. So we really need to work on fixing our infrastructure. We also need to repair our domestic supply chain. As it is right now, if you've got a problem with China, one of the things we could say is, well, why don't you just stop buying anything from China? Let's just stop buying stuff from China. Good luck with that. Let me know how that goes. You're going to have a terrible time doing it. And worse than that, we have products that relate to our national security. So, for example, electronics. It's now to the point that they're Defense Department related products, aircraft carriers, fighter planes, satellites, all this kind of thing that require components that we no longer make. And that's a serious problem. So we need to redo our domestic supply chain, which will also bring us jobs. It'll cost more, but that relates to the next thing. Billy is reminding us, please start the watch party again. And I'm sorry for the lumpy start today. Sometimes that's the way it is. So start a watch party. Let's try and get our numbers up. Anyway, if we start to build things in the United States, the cost will go up. And that's just the way it is. Well, if costs are going to go up, then wages also need to go up. And that's number 4. We need to be able to pay a living wage to people. And paying people a living wage, 4 years ago in 2016, the message was $15 an hour. Well, I think it might need to be more now. Whatever it is, when we start to do that, that will also raise taxes. Because when people get paid more, they end up having to pay more in taxes. So that will be good for us as well. We'll be able to fund this infrastructure that we want to do. Number 6, we need support for workers that are in declining industries. And we see that in Kentucky with industries like coal and tobacco. Coal is is getting priced out of the market right now. Between fracking, natural gas has now gotten to be so much of a better value that bit by bit coal is going away. And even with President Trump claiming he was going to bring coal back and all these new jobs you were going to get, in Kentucky it turned out to be only about 120 jobs. Extracting coal is very mechanized work. So what they were finding was that it's a guy sitting on a machine, and where they used to have 10 or 20 people, it's just one person now. We also, by the way, as we tried to increase coal production here, increased the amount of black lung. It was something like 400 cases broke out in eastern Kentucky. I want to say late last year, third quarter last year. And if that had been any other disease, 400, if that had been AIDS, that would have been national news, but we ignore it. Next, we need to move to renewable energy, water, wind, and solar. We're already kind of doing this. Now, in Kentucky, at the state level, we don't do a great job encouraging you to move towards renewable, to putting solar panels on your roof. There's a national program that will reimburse you, but energy is very inexpensive in Kentucky, and there are various ways we could encourage this more. There's good news. Turns out that businesses have been adding their own solar power capacity throughout the country, and it's been a significant increase. So we need to continue that work, because the more we can go towards renewable energy, the better off we're going to be. That's going to be better for the climate and better for our environment. Number 9, abuse prevention, rehabilitation, and support. If you're a Kentuckian, you know the scourge of the opioid crisis and the difficulties of dealing with it. And part of the opioid crisis, we've got to recognize the role of certain congressmen in encouraging opioid manufacturers to sell too many opioids. And one of them is Brett Guthrie, and this is the guy I'm running against. If you go to opensecrets.org and start spending a little time on that, put his name in there, you'll see that there are pharmaceutical companies that give him money. He also, by the way, gets money from both AT&T and Verizon, and yet we have crappy wireless service and crappy internet coverage. Anyway, back to I skipped over one, but I'll go back to it in a second. So anyway, we allowed pharmaceutical companies to oversell opioids. There are people who need opioids that are in chronic pain, and they've got to have them, but because the opioids got spread way too far, I think in West Virginia they had a town where they had two pharmacies that distributed enough opioids for every man, woman, and child in the town to have 500 doses a year or something crazy like that. When you've got a relative or a friend who is addicted to opioids or meth or any of these addictive substances, it's a very difficult job. It's something a family generally can't handle on their own, and they do need help. And we tend to throw these folks in prison and kind of throw away the key. And when you combine that with in some states there are prisons that are for profit, now they represent $60 a day in profit to a corporation, so of course they're not going to let them out. So I'm in favor of decriminalizing the use of the drugs. That doesn't mean that if you're a meth addict and you go break into someone's garage and steal their lawnmower, that you should get out of jail free. You should be punished for that. But if say you've been let out of prison and you get pulled over for a broken taillight and they find out that you've been high in the last 24 hours, that shouldn't send you back to prison. That should send you into rehab. I also believe we should do the legalization of cannabis. Kentucky already grows $1 billion worth of cannabis a year. It's illegal. We spend money chasing down these folks instead of charging taxes on it. So the reality is cannabis is here, and it can also be used for pain relief. Cannabis is a great way to avoid using painkillers. That, in fact, in states with legalized cannabis, they have a lower use of painkillers and lower rates of addiction and lower rates of overdose as well. The one that I skipped, I want to go back to, and that's rural broadband. Remember me talking about Brett Guthrie taking money from AT&T and Verizon. You know, we've talked about, in the country, we talk about how 30% of the country, especially in rural America, does not have access to broadband. That's ridiculous. Broadband is now like electricity or water. You have got to have it to function in daily life in the United States. So I'm proposing a national program like rural electrification that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President Roosevelt, FDR, made that happen in 1936. They were able to do this with, they would fund cooperatives. And those co-ops were able to provide electricity. Some of those still exist. The rural electric cooperatives. There are communities in the 2nd District that have RECs. So we should do the same thing with broadband. There's an interesting way we could do it, and it ties to the post office. I won't go into detail now, but the basic idea is the post office is tasked with making sure that there's a free flow of information across the country. And a friend of mine, Rich Campbell from the band America, suggested that could be used to have the post office in charge of providing broadband to every house in the United States. He goes a little bit deeper with that. That's all. So the final one I want to talk about is a little bit controversial, but maybe not. And that's the idea of a cabinet-level Secretary of Rural Affairs. And this would be someone who would be tasked with helping rural America become a place that you can do more than just survive, that it can become a place that you can thrive. Because look at this place. Look at how beautiful this is here in rural Kentucky. And there's a peacefulness you get here that you won't get anywhere else. But there's not a lot of work here. Not a lot of work. And that's the sort of thing we need to address. We need to restore and rebuild. Mary says, could Joe Biden pick me for VP? I'm happy to do it, but I think there's plenty of great choices ahead of me. But thank you, Mary. That's very sweet. Anyway, we have an urban and rural divide, and we need to address that because the health of the country will be improved. If you live in a city, the health of the country will be improved if we are able to get life in rural America restored and rebuilt. I mean, I imagine kids that are, getting out of college being able to get a job with Apple or Google or whoever, but being able to live in the 2nd District, to live, a short drive from Bowling Green or a short drive from Elizabethtown or Bardstown, and they'd have a fantastic lifestyle and be earning real money from these modern tech corporations. So anyway, that's it. I'm going to show you this one more time. I apologize for all the wackiness today. I'll get to the bottom of it. But I will see you tomorrow. Thank you all for being here. Remember, get angry. It doesn't mean to lose your damn mind. It means to build up your energy, build up your determination, and get ready to do the right thing in November. I believe Democrats are going to win. I believe our nominee is going to be the next president. And we've then got a lot of repair work to do, but we are going to move this guy out of here, and it's going to be great. All right. I love you all. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Okay, take care. Bye.